The bread was 3 days old and hard as stone, but it was all Sarah had left. She huddled in the alley behind the baker's shop, pressing herself into the shadows as the winter wind cut through her thin dress. The snow had started falling an hour ago, soft and relentless, and already her fingers were numb, her lips cracked, her body shaking with a cold that had settled into her bones weeks ago and never left. She was going to die tonight. She knew it, with the same quiet certainty she knew her own name. The cold would take her, or the hunger, or the fever that had been building in her chest for days. Orphan Omegas didn't survive winters on the streets. Everyone knew that. At least the bread would give her something to hold on to at the end. She lifted it to her lips, ready to take the first bite, the last meal she would ever eat, when a sound made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy boots crunching through the fresh snow. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows, making herself as small as possible. She'd learned early that being seen meant being hurt. The shop owners who threw things at her for lingering too close. The guards who kicked her out of doorways where she tried to sleep. The other street dwellers who would kill for a scrap of bread half the size of the one she held. The footsteps stopped at the mouth of the alley. She didn't dare breathe. A figure stood silhouetted against the torchlight from the main street. Massive, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a cloak of black fur that probably cost more than Sarah would earn in 10 lifetimes, if she'd had 10 lifetimes to earn anything at all. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his eyes on her, searching the darkness, finding her despite her stillness, despite her silence, despite the shadows that should have hidden her completely. "You can come out?" the figure said. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying an authority that made her bones vibrate. "I'm not going to hurt you." Sarah had heard that before, from the merchant who'd promised her work and then tried to sell her to a brothel, from the innkeeper who'd offered her shelter and then locked her in a cellar for 3 days. People lied, especially to Omegas, especially to orphans with no one to miss them if they disappeared. She stayed silent, stayed still. The figure sighed and stepped into the alley. Up close, he was even larger than she'd realized. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and coiled strength. When he crouched down a few feet away from her, still giving her space, she noticed, still not crowding her, the torchlight caught his features. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. He was handsome in a brutal, ancient way, like a sword that had been forged in fire and never lost its edge. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Golden, bright as molten metal even in the dim light, with vertical pupils that marked him as something far more dangerous than human. Lycan. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Lycans were monsters. Everyone knew that. They ate humans, hunted them for sport, tore them apart for the pleasure of it. An Omega alone in an alley with a Lycan was as good as dead. But she was going to die anyway, and her legs were too weak to run. And some small, tired part of her was simply done being afraid. "Please," she whispered, holding out the bread with trembling hands. "Take it. Just make it quick. Please." The Lycan went very still. "You're offering me your food," he said slowly, "and asking me to kill you quickly in exchange? It's all I have." Her voice cracked. "I know it's not much, but maybe if you're not hungry, you won't make it hurt." Something shifted in his golden eyes, something that looked almost like pain. "Little one." His voice had changed, softened into something that made her chest ache. "When did you last eat?" The question confused her. I. What? When did you last eat? Before this bread? She tried to remember. The days had started blurring together weeks ago. I don't. 4 days? Maybe 5? There was half a potato someone dropped near the market. A sound rumbled from his chest. Low, dangerous, but not directed at her. He looked at the bread in her hands, her last possession in the world, and then at her face, her hollow cheeks, her cracked lips, her eyes that had long since lost their light. You were about to eat that, he said, your last piece of bread, and when you saw me, you offered it to me instead. You're bigger, stronger. You could just take it. She didn't understand why he was talking instead of acting, didn't understand why he was looking at her like she was something other than prey. I thought, if I gave it willingly, maybe you'd be kind about the rest. The rest being your death. She nodded. The Lycan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. How old are you? 19, I think. I stopped counting after my parents died. When was that? 10 years ago. There was a fire. I was the only one who survived. The words came out flat, rehearsed. She'd told this story so many times, to so many people who didn't care. I've been on the streets since then. Omega, no pack, no family, no one. The Lycan was quiet for a long moment. The snow fell around them, soft and silent, blanketing the alley in white. Then he did something she didn't expect. He reached up and unclasped his cloak, that beautiful, expensive cloak of black fur, and held it out to her. Put this on. Sira stared at it, stared at him. I don't understand. You're freezing to death. Put this on. But, please. The word seemed to cost him something. I can't. He stopped, jaw tightening. Please, just put it on. Her hands were shaking too badly to manage the clasp, so he did it for her, his movements careful, his fingers never lingering. The cloak engulfed her, warm from his body heat, and she almost sobbed at the sensation. She'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Now, the Lycan said, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Can you do that? She nodded, mute, overwhelmed. My name is Kaelan. I'm the King of Blackmoor. He said it simply, without pride or expectation. I've been traveling through the outer territories checking on my people. I stopped in this village for supplies, and then I caught your scent on the wind, and I followed it here. My scent? You're my mate. His golden eyes held hers. My true mate. The one I've been searching for since before your grandmother's grandmother was born. I've waited 400 years to find you. And I found you in an alley, freezing to death, offering your last bite of food to a stranger because you thought it might buy you a kinder death. Sarah's mind went blank. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. She was no one. Nothing. An orphan Omega who was going to die in the snow, unmourned and forgotten. That's not possible, she breathed. It is. Kaelan's voice was rough. And I know you have no reason to believe me, no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove it. He held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Come with me instead. Let me take you somewhere warm. Let me feed you. Let me show you that you don't have to die in an alley tonight. Sira looked at his hand, at his eyes, ancient and golden, and somehow impossibly kind. She thought about the bread, still clutched in her other hand, about the cold, the hunger, the fever burning in her chest, about the death she'd accepted as inevitable, And then she thought about warmth, about food, about a chance, however small, however impossible, to live. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, gentle as a promise. "That's my girl," he murmured. "Come on, let's get you home." Sarah woke in a bed softer than clouds. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't open her eyes. She was certain that if she did, the dream would shatter, and she'd find herself back in the alley with snow piling on her body and death settling into her bones. But the warmth didn't fade. The softness didn't disappear. And somewhere nearby, a fire crackled with a sound so comforting she wanted to weep. She opened her eyes. The room was beautiful. Stone walls hung with tapestries in deep reds and golds. A fireplace large enough to stand in, blazing with heat. Tall windows draped in velvet, through which pale winter sunlight streamed. And the bed was enormous, piled with furs and quilts and pillows, surrounding her in luxury she had never imagined possible. "This isn't real," she thought. "I died in that alley. This is what comes after." "You're awake." Sierra's head snapped toward the voice. Kaelin sat in a chair by the fire, still dressed in the dark clothes from last night. He looked exhausted, shadows under his golden eyes, his jaw rough with stubble, like he hadn't slept at all. "You've been unconscious for 2 days," he said quietly. "The fever nearly took you. The healers weren't sure." He stopped, jaw tightening. "But you're strong. Stronger than anyone gave you credit for." 2 days. She'd been asleep for 2 days. "Where am I?" "Blackmore Castle, my home." He rose from the chair but didn't approach the bed. Kept his distance, she noticed. Gave her space even here, even now. "How do you feel?" Sarah took stock of her body. The fever was gone, replaced by a pleasant warmth that seemed to radiate from the blankets themselves. Her throat no longer burned, her chest no longer ached, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't hungry. "I feel—" She didn't have words for it. "I don't understand. The healers. You brought healers for me." "Of course I did. But I'm—" She stopped herself before she could say worthless, before she could say no one, before she could remind him of all the reasons why none of this made sense. Kaelin's expression softened, as if he could hear the words she hadn't spoken. "You're my mate, Sarah. There is nothing in this world I wouldn't do for you." She looked down at her hands, resting on the rich quilts. They were clean. Someone had bathed her while she was unconscious, washed away the grime and the filth, tended to the cuts and calluses. Her nails were trimmed. Her hair, she realized, was soft and untangled, spread across the pillow like silk. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be lying about everything. I could be—" "You offered a stranger your last piece of bread." Kaelin's voice was rough. "You thought I was going to kill you, and instead of begging for your life, you tried to make sure I wasn't hungry first. You expected death, and still thought of someone else." His golden eyes burned into hers. "That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back furiously. Crying was weakness. Crying got you noticed, got you hurt, got you— "It's all right." Kaelin's voice was gentle. "You're safe here. You can feel whatever you need to feel." The tears spilled over. She couldn't stop them. She cried for the parents she'd lost, the childhood stolen from her, the years of hunger and cold and fear. She cried for the girl who had learned to make herself invisible, who had accepted that she would die alone and unmourned. She cried for everything she'd never let herself grieve, because grieving required hope, and hope had been beaten out of her long ago. Kalen didn't try to comfort her, didn't cross the room, didn't touch her, didn't tell her it would be okay. He simply sat in his chair by the fire and let her cry, his presence steady and undemanding. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah felt hollowed out, empty, but not in a bad way, like she'd been carrying something heavy for so long she'd forgotten it was there, and now that it was gone, she could finally breathe. "I'm sorry," she rasped. "Don't be." Kalen's voice was soft. "You have nothing to apologize for." A knock at the door made her flinch. Kalen's expression flickered with something like pain at her reaction, but he simply called out, "Enter." A servant appeared, a Lycan woman with kind eyes and silver hair, carrying a tray laden with food. Real food. Soup that steamed and smelled of herbs. Fresh bread, soft and warm. A pot of tea. Sliced fruit that glistened with juice. "The healers said to start slowly," the woman said, setting the tray on a table near the bed. "Small portions. Your stomach needs time to adjust." Sarah stared at the food. Her hands were trembling. "Eat," Kalen said gently. "As much or as little as you want. No one is going to take it from you." She reached for the bread first. It was soft, warm, fresh from the oven. She took a bite, and the taste was so overwhelming that fresh tears sprang to her eyes. "Good?" Kalen asked, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. She nodded, unable to speak around the bread in her mouth. She ate slowly, carefully, the way you eat when you've learned that food can disappear at any moment. The soup was rich and savory. The fruit was sweet and bright. The tea was warm and soothing, settling her stomach and calming her nerves. When she finally set down her spoon, she felt fuller than she had in years, not just in her stomach, in her soul. "What happens now?" she asked. Kalen leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That depends on you. You're welcome to stay here as long as you like. You'll have this room, or another, if you prefer. You'll be fed, clothed, cared for. You'll have access to the healers, the libraries, the gardens, anything you want. And in return?" The question came out sharper than she intended, honed by years of learning that nothing came without a price. Every kindness had a cost. Every gift had a debt attached. Kalen didn't flinch. "Nothing. I'm not asking anything of you, Sarah. The mate bond, it doesn't work that way. I can't claim you without your consent. I wouldn't want to, even if I could. Then why do all this? Why save me, heal me, give me all of this, if you don't want anything?" "I want you to live." His voice cracked on the word. "I want you to know what it feels like to be warm and fed and safe. I want you to have the chance to figure out who you are when you're not just trying to survive." He held her gaze, his golden eyes raw with emotion. "And if, after all of that, you decide you want to know me, really know me, then we can talk about what comes next. But only if you choose it. Only if you want it." Sarah stared at him, this ancient king who had searched for her for 400 years, who had found her dying in an alley and carried her to safety, who sat across the room from her now, offering her everything and asking for nothing. "I don't know how to trust you," she admitted. "I don't know how to trust anyone." "I know." His smile was sad and understanding. "I'm not asking you to trust me today. I'm just asking you to stay, to give yourself time to heal, and maybe eventually to let me earn that trust." She thought about the alley, the cold, the bread she'd been ready to die holding. She thought about this room, the fire, the food still warming her belly. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll stay." Kalen's smile transformed his face, softening the sharp edges, lighting up those ancient golden eyes. "Thank you," he said. "That's all I ask." Weeks passed, and Sarah learned what it meant to be cared for. It started with small things, meals that appeared 3 times a day without fail, not scraps or leftovers, but proper food, prepared by the castle kitchens specifically for her. Clothes that fit her growing frame, as proper nutrition filled out her hollow cheeks and sharpened bones. A fire that was always burning when she returned to her room, keeping the winter chill at bay. But more than the physical comforts, it was Kalen himself who surprised her. He never pushed, never demanded her time or her presence. He simply made himself available. For breakfast in the smaller dining hall if she felt up to company, for walks through the snow-covered gardens if she wanted fresh air, for quiet evenings in the library if she needed distraction. And when she didn't want any of those things, when the weight of her past pressed down and she needed to be alone, he gave her space without question or resentment. Slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice it happening, Sarah began to seek him out. "Tell me about them," Kalen said one evening. They were in the library, settled into armchairs before a roaring fire. Snow fell softly outside the tall windows, but inside it was warm, comfortable, safe. Sarah had a cup of tea cradled in her hands, the warmth seeping into her palms. "About who?" "Your parents." His golden eyes were gentle. "You never speak of them, but I see it sometimes. The way your face changes when you smell bread baking, or hear a certain kind of music, like you're remembering something precious." Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't talked about her parents in years, hadn't let herself think about them, except in the darkest hours of the night when memories crept in uninvited. "My mother used to sing," she said quietly. "Old folk songs, the kind passed down from grandmother to daughter. She had a beautiful voice. I used to fall asleep to it every night." "And your father?" "He was a carpenter. Made furniture, mostly. Tables and chairs and cradles for new babies." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "He tried to teach me once. I was terrible. Couldn't cut a straight line to save my life, but he never got frustrated. Just laughed and said I had other talents." "What talents?" Sarah hesitated. This was the part she never told anyone. The part that felt too precious to share, too fragile to survive being spoken aloud. But something about the firelight, the snow, the steady warmth of Kalen's presence made her brave. "I used to draw," she whispered. "Charcoal on scraps of paper, mostly. Sometimes I'd use the ash from the fireplace and the back of old receipts my father brought home. I wasn't very good, but I loved it. The way you could make something out of nothing. The way a few lines could become a face, a flower, a whole world." "Used to?" "There wasn't much opportunity for art on the streets." Her voice flattened. "Hard to draw when you're trying not to freeze to death." Kalen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "Would you like to draw again?" Sarah looked up, startled. "What?" "If I had supplies brought to your room, paper, charcoal, pencils, whatever you need, would you want to try again?" She stared at him. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and something in her chest cracked open, just a little. "I don't know if I remember how." "Then you'll learn again." His golden eyes held hers. "And if it turns out you've forgotten, or you don't enjoy it anymore, that's fine too. But I'd like to give you the chance to find out." The supplies arrived the next morning. Not just charcoal and paper, but fine pencils in varying grades, coloured inks, brushes, canvases. An entire artist's studio delivered to her room as casually as a breakfast tray. Sierra sat on the floor, surrounded by materials, and cried. She drew for hours that first day. Her hands remembered more than she'd expected. The way to hold the charcoal, the pressure needed for different lines, the techniques for shading and shadow. The first few sketches were rough, unpracticed. But by evening, she'd filled a dozen pages with drawings of the view from her window, the fire in the hearth, a remembered image of her mother's face. When Kaylin knocked on her door that night, she opened it with charcoal smudged on her cheek and tears drying on her skin. "Thank you," she said. The words weren't enough, would never be enough, but they were all she had. He smiled, that soft, gentle smile that transformed his harsh features, and reached out to brush the charcoal from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but Sierra felt it down to her bones. "May I see?" She stepped aside and let him in. He looked at every drawing, studied them carefully, thoughtfully, the way someone looks at something that matters. When he reached the sketch of her mother, he went very still. "She was beautiful," he said quietly. "You have her eyes." Sierra's vision blurred with fresh tears. "I was starting to forget what she looked like. I was so afraid I'd lose her completely. But when I started drawing, it just came back." Kaylin turned to face her. His golden eyes were wet. "You're extraordinary," he said. "Do you know that? Everything you've survived, everything you've lost, and you still have this inside you, this ability to create beauty out of nothing, to find light in the darkness." His voice cracked. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever met." "I'm not," she started. "You are." He stepped closer, and she didn't step back. "You are brave and resilient and talented and kind. You offered your last piece of bread to a stranger because you thought it might buy a gentler death. That's not nothing, Sarah. That's everything." She looked up at him, this ancient king who had given her back her life, her art, her hope, who looked at her like she hung the stars in the sky when she'd spent her whole life believing she was worthless. "I'm starting to believe you," she whispered. Something fierce and tender blazed in his eyes. "That's all I've ever wanted." She reached up, hesitant, and pressed her palm against his chest. His heart thundered beneath her touch, rapid and desperate. He went completely still, barely breathing, letting her decide what she wanted. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "I know. But I'm more scared of never knowing what this could be." She met his gaze. "I want to know you, Kaylin. Really know you. If you'll let me." His hand came up to cover hers, warm and steady over her hammering heart. "I've been waiting 400 years for you to say that," he murmured. "I would have waited 400 more." When he kissed her, soft and reverent and full of promise, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a door opening, a light turning on. A piece of herself she thought she'd lost forever clicking back into place. For the first time in 10 years, she felt like she was home. The nightmare found her 3 weeks later. Sarah woke, gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, her heart slamming against her ribs. The dream had been vivid, the alley, the cold, the certainty of death. But this time, when the stranger had appeared, it wasn't Kaylin. It was a faceless figure who laughed as he took her bread, took her hope, took everything, and left her to freeze alone in the dark. She was still shaking when a knock came at her door. "Sierra?" Kaylin's voice, rough with sleep but alert with concern. I felt, "Are you all right?" She stumbled to the door and opened it. He stood in the hallway in sleep clothes, his dark hair dishevelled, his golden eyes scanning her face with naked worry. "Nightmare," she managed. He didn't ask if he could come in, didn't assume anything. Just stood there, waiting for her to decide what she needed. "Stay," she whispered. "Please. I don't want to be alone." He followed her inside and settled into the chair by the fire while she climbed back into bed. He didn't try to join her, didn't push for more than she offered. He simply sat there, a solid presence in the darkness, keeping watch while she slowly stopped trembling. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked quietly. "It was the alley, the night you found me." Her voice came out thin, fragile. "But in the dream, you weren't there. There was someone else and he—" She couldn't finish. "I'm here now." Kaylin's voice was steady as stone. "I will always be here, Sarah. Whenever you need me. For as long as you want me." She looked at him across the firelit room. This king who had upended his entire night because he'd somehow felt her fear. Who sat vigil in a chair rather than presume he was welcome in her bed. Who had spent months proving with actions what words alone could never convey. "Come here," she said. He went still. "Sarah? I want you here, beside me." She pulled back the covers on the empty side of the bed. Just to sleep. Just to not be alone. He crossed the room slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. When he lowered himself onto the mattress, he stayed on top of the covers, maintaining a careful distance. "Is this all right?" "Yes." She reached out and took his hand. "This is perfect." They lay there in the darkness, hands intertwined, the fire crackling softly. Sarah felt the tension slowly drain from her body, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. She slept without dreams for the rest of the night. When morning came, she woke to find Kaylin still beside her, still holding her hand, his golden eyes watching her with an expression of such profound tenderness that her breath caught. "Good morning," he murmured. "You stayed. You asked me to." Such a simple statement, such an enormous truth. She had asked, and he had stayed. No conditions, no expectations, just presence. "I love you," she said. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. She hadn't planned to say them, hadn't known she was going to until they were already out, hanging in the air between them like a held breath. Kaylin's eyes went bright, wet. His hand tightened around hers. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you." And now that she'd started, she couldn't stop. "I love you, Kaylin. I don't know when it happened, or how it happened, but I love you. I love that you found me in that alley and didn't leave me to die. I love that you gave me time and space and never once made me feel like I owed you anything. I love that you brought me art supplies and sat with me through nightmares and made me believe I was worth something when I'd forgotten how to believe it myself." He kissed her. Not soft this time. Desperate, hungry, full of 400 years of loneliness finally breaking apart. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all the words she didn't know how to say into the press of her lips, the clutch of her hands. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I love you," Kaylin said, his voice ragged. "I have loved you since the moment I found you in that alley. I will love you until the world ends and beyond. You are my heart, Sarah, my soul, my everything." She pulled him close, burying her face in his chest. His arms wrapped around her, strong and warm and safe. "I want to be yours," she whispered against his shirt. "Really yours. I want the bond. I want forever." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "Are you sure? I need you to be sure, Sarah. Once we complete the bond, it can't be undone. You'll be tied to me for the rest of your life." "The rest of my life." She smiled. A real smile, bright and full and unafraid. "That sounds perfect." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. And when his lips moved to her neck, to the place where the mate mark would go, she tilted her head back and gave him access. "I love you," she said again, because she could, because she wanted to, because for the first time in her life, she had someone to say it to. "I love you too," he murmured against her skin. "My mate, my queen, my miracle in an alley." The bond sealed with a flash of warmth that spread through her entire body. She gasped at the sensation. Kaelin's presence flooding into her mind, his love and devotion and fierce protectiveness becoming part of her very soul. She wasn't alone anymore. She would never be alone again. Later that day, a messenger arrived with news from the outer territories. "The village where you found her, my king." The messenger's voice was careful, measured. "There's been talk. People are asking questions about the Omega girl who disappeared. Some are saying she was stolen, that she should be returned to her rightful place." Sierra's blood went cold. She knew what rightful place meant. The streets, the cold, the slow death she'd been rescued from. Kaelin's expression didn't change, but she felt his rage through the bond, a roaring inferno barely contained beneath a mask of calm. "And who is saying this?" "A merchant named Aldrich, my lord. He claims he had an arrangement with the girl, that she owes him a debt for food and shelter he provided over the years." Sarah's stomach turned. Aldrich. The man who had helped her when she was 15, given her scraps in exchange for work, then demanded more when she couldn't pay. She'd run from him years ago, but apparently he hadn't forgotten. "He's lying," she said, her voice shaking. I don't owe him anything. He tried to—" "You don't need to explain." Kaelin's voice was gentle, but his eyes were murder. "I believe you." He turned to the messenger. "Bring this merchant to Blackmore. I want to have a conversation with him about the nature of debt." The messenger bowed and departed. Kaelin turned to Sarah, cupping her face in his hands. "He will never touch you, never come near you. I promise you that." "I know." And she did. Through the bond, she could feel his determination, his love, his absolute certainty that he would protect her. "But I want to face him, like you faced him for me. I want to face my past. I want to show him that the girl he thought was nothing became everything." Pride blazed in Kaelin's golden eyes. "Then we face him together," he said. "And we show him exactly what happens to people who try to hurt my queen." Aldrich arrived at Blackmore 3 days later, dragged between 2 Lycan guards who handled him with barely concealed disgust. Sarah watched from the throne beside Kaelin as the merchant was brought before them. He looked smaller than she remembered, shorter, thinner, less imposing. The years had not been kind to him. His hair had gone grey, his face lined with the marks of a bitter life. But his eyes, those cruel, calculating eyes, were exactly the same. They widened when he saw her. "You," he breathed. Then his gaze took in the crown on her head, the fine gown she wore, the king whose hand rested possessively on hers. His face went the colour of old ash. That's not possible. And yet here we are." Sierra's voice came out steady, stronger than she'd expected. Through the bond, she felt Kaelin's pride and support flowing into her like a river. You claimed I owed you a debt, Aldrich. I thought we should discuss that. The merchant's eyes darted between her and Kaelin, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Your Majesty, there's been a misunderstanding. I never meant to imply. You told half the outer territories that my mate was stolen property. Kaelin's voice was soft, almost pleasant. It was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. That she belonged to you, that she should be returned to her rightful place. I didn't know. I couldn't have known she was a child. Kaelin rose from his throne, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. A starving, orphaned child who came to you for help, and you gave her scraps in exchange for labor. And when she couldn't pay whatever twisted price you decided she owed, you tried to take more. Didn't you? Aldrich's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Sierra stood, descending the steps of the dais until she was face to face with the man who had haunted her nightmares for years. He flinched back, but the guards held him in place. I was 15, she said quietly. I was starving, and you offered me food. I thought you were being kind. And then you told me I owed you, that I'd have to work off my debt. And when I tried to leave, you told me no one would ever want a worthless Omega like me, that I should be grateful anyone was willing to feed me at all. Aldrich's face contorted. I was trying to help you. You were nothing. You would have died without me. I almost died anyway. Sarah held his gaze, unflinching. I spent years on the streets because I was more afraid of what you'd do if I went back than I was of freezing to death. You didn't help me, Aldrich. You used me. And when I escaped, you let everyone believe I was ungrateful, disobedient, worthless. She leaned closer, and the merchant trembled. But I'm not worthless, she said. I never was. It just took finding someone who saw my value for me to believe it. She stepped back, returning to Kaelin's side. His hand found hers immediately, warm and steady. Aldrich of the Outer Territories, Kaelin announced, his voice carrying through the hall. You are charged with the exploitation of vulnerable citizens, the spreading of false claims against the crown, and the attempted enslavement of the Queen of Blackmoor. The colour drained from Aldrich's face. Enslavement? I never— Your Majesty, please. The penalty for these crimes is death. Kaelin's golden eyes were merciless. However, my queen has requested that I show you mercy. Sarah felt the shock ripple through the hall. Even Aldrich looked stunned. You will be stripped of your merchant's license, Sarah said. Your assets will be seized and distributed to the orphanages and shelters of the Outer Territories, the places where children like me should have been able to find help instead of exploitation. You will spend the rest of your days doing manual labor in the kingdom's workhouses, and every day, for the rest of your miserable life, you will remember that the worthless Omega you tried to destroy became queen. Aldrich stared at her with something between horror and disbelief. Take him away, Kaelin commanded. As the guards dragged the merchant from the hall, his protests echoing off the stone walls, Sarah felt something release in her chest. A weight she'd been carrying since she was 15 years old finally lifted. Kaelin pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Are you all right? Better than all right. She looked up at him, at this fierce, ancient king who had given her everything. I'm free. The coronation ceremony took place on the first day of spring. Sarah stood before the great altar of Blackmoor, surrounded by hundreds of Lycans who had travelled from every corner of the kingdom to witness their new queen. She wore white and silver, with a crown of spring flowers woven through her hair. The mate mark on her neck was visible for all to see, a declaration of the bond that tied her to their king. When the high priestess placed the queen's crown upon her head, the hall erupted in howls of celebration. But it was Kaelin's face that Sarah watched, the pride in his golden eyes, the love that blazed so bright it almost hurt to look at, the wonder, even now, that she had chosen him. "My queen," he murmured, for her ears alone. "My king," she answered. The feast lasted until dawn. Sarah danced until her feet ached, laughed until her cheeks hurt, smiled so much she thought her face might crack from the unfamiliarity of it. She met nobles and commoners, warriors and healers, all of them bowing to her with genuine respect, not because she was Kaelin's mate, but because word of her story had spread. The orphan Omega, who had survived 10 years on the streets, who had offered her last piece of bread to a stranger, who had faced down her past and emerged victorious. She was no longer no one. She was someone. She was queen. 1 year later, Sarah sat on the balcony of the royal chambers, a sketch pad in her lap and the spring breeze playing with her hair. She was drawing Kaelin. He lay sprawled in a chair nearby, pretending to read a report, but actually watching her with that soft, wondering expression he got sometimes, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're staring," she said, without looking up. "I'm admiring." He set aside the report and crossed to her, crouching beside her chair. His hand came to rest on the swell of her belly, warm and reverent. "How are you feeling?" "Hungry, tired, happy." She set down her charcoal and covered his hand with hers. "So happy, Kaelin. I didn't know it was possible to be this happy." "You deserve it." He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "You deserve everything good in this world, and more." She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, starving in an alley, ready to die, offering her last piece of bread to a stranger because she thought it might buy her a kinder death. She thought about the woman she'd become, queen, mate, artist, mother-to-be. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For finding me, for seeing me, for believing I was worth something when I'd forgotten how to believe it myself." She cupped his face in her hands, this ancient king who had given her back her life. "For whispering, 'Come with me instead,' when I was ready to give up." His eyes glistened. "You were always worth finding, Sarah. You were always worth waiting for. Every lonely century, every empty year. It was all worth it to end up here, with you." She kissed him as the spring sun warmed their skin and their child kicked beneath their joined hands. Once, she had been an orphan with nothing but a piece of stale bread and a willingness to die. Now she was loved, she was cherished, she was home, and she would never be hungry again. If you enjoyed Sarah and Kaelin's story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Leave a comment below telling me your favorite part, and I'll see you in the next one.